Today on True Patriot Love, we're going to meet with Brian Islet, and we are going to talk about defense, and specifically Karen Hogan's audit reports on housing and recruitment. It is unbelievable when you read the reports, not hitting our targets, not even actually looking at the applications that are filed. I thought when I started that we had no one interested in getting into the military. Well, I read the report and it turns out that was totally wrong. 190,000, applications over 3 years. Only 15,000 taken. Why? Where's the plan? And then when they get into the military, there's no housing. We're short housing. We don't have enough beds. We don't have enough apartments. We don't have enough single family dwellings. We don't have enough multi-dwellings for our military and for our armed forces. And the condition, quite frankly, they're 1930 homes falling apart, should be demolished, should be rebuilt. We can't get people with the skill sets to do it. Why don't we use our existing military? Well, today on the show, we're going to find out, and we're going to hear stories from Brian why exactly all of this is happening. Today on True Patriot Love, we're lucky enough to have Brian Isted with us, and we're going to tackle the pillar defense. And today we wanted to go through with Brian the budget and also talk about some of the challenges with this budget. So, Brian, welcome, brother.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for coming aboard. I spent about a week on the budget before it passed. And one of the key pillars in the budget was defense and, of course, increasing the spending. And I was kind of astounded with some of the things that were in there from the military and the armed forces perspective. The budget proposes $81.8 billion over 5 years to be spent, in addition to what currently is being spent today. So that's the increase that they're talking about, which is a huge increase, and that's one of the reasons our deficit sort of climbed to this, magic number and $65 billion going forward. $20.4 billion over the next 5 years to recruit, retain a strong fighting force, including generational pay raises for the CAF and support of the CAF healthcare. And he did a lot of that. I think Carney went and gave everyone a 20% raise. It's being kind of phased in. I think it's $2 billion. He also then, they also put in the budget a $19 billion repair and basically invest in defense infrastructure over 5 years. So they have kind of a recruit, train, healthcare, infrastructure to accommodate these gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen, and basically create a better training infrastructure and expand ammunition. So that's kind of the category. So, you tie those two together, you're $40 billion over 5 years. So they're going to roughly $8 billion a year. So let's, just if we go to the recruitment side, they're looking on average at $4 billion a year. So as you and I talked about, before the show, if they take out the pay raises, which are about $1 billion, blended over about $1 billion a year for the existing 65,000, men and women in the military, we're talking about $3 billion to recruit people and to bring them aboard. So if you're, I don't know, say, what's the average salary of, it varies by position, I know, but like 100,000?
No, definitely not. The officers probably now with that raise, but the NCM or the non-commissioned members, the junior ranks, are definitely not 100,000 until I think you get to the rank of like a senior sergeant or a warrant. But it's definitely less than that. I'm pretty sure anyway.
I've looked quickly at the pay. The starting guys I could see roughly were about $7,000 a month. Kind of 6,000 to 7,000 a month is where they were, somewhere in there.
That's a lot more than I was making I could have really used that a few years ago. Holy cow.
Yeah,
Fair
well,
enough.
that's what they increased because they just went up. They just went up. You figure they went up 20%. So if they were making 5,000, they got to 6, and if they're making 6, they got to 7. So they're roughly between 6 and 7 now, I think. So plus healthcare benefits. So city cost 100,000. So if you look through the plan, they're talking about recruiting upwards 30, maybe 40,000, depending if raises kind of tail off, people per year. And so when I looked at it, I said, okay. So I asked Christoph, I said to him, 30 to 40,000 people a year, where are they going to get 35 to 40,000 people a year? And then what popped up, and I sent you the deck, and I'm going to throw the deck on the screen. It was really interesting because there's a Auditor General report. Auditor General of Canada came out, and it said, basically reviewing the recruitment strategies and how many people they've had for the last 3 years. So from 2022 to 25, and they basically, said 192,000 people applied, but basically they weren't able to get even 19,000 of them aboard recruited. And they fell short. They actually only got 15,000. So over 3 years, they were only able to get 5,000 a year. And now they're talking basically of bumping that up to 30 to 40,000 a year. So, it's very aggressive. And I understand, they're putting a bunch of money behind it. They're really not giving us a plan on how to do it. But it's interesting. You told the story before the show. When you tell your story of how you got recruited, because I think it was very interesting. And it's almost like you wrote this report. So I don't want to wreck the story. I want you to tell the story first. And I want to actually read what the Auditor General said, because your story pretty much ties to what she said, right?
Yeah, so I started I was finishing my degree in criminology. I already had a diploma in police foundation. So I knew one way or another I was getting into the law enforcement military field with my education. It was what I wanted to do, and it was what my education made sense to do. So I think it was the final year of university, 2011 for me. I started applying to reserve regiments in and around the London area. I was at Western, sort of not realizing that nobody was really going to want to take me on as I was sort of planning on leaving. I didn't really know how to go about it. So my serious application, I think, went in probably around late 2011-ish to the big machine, because it's mostly done online. So between 2011 and 2000, I believe the end of 2012, so it was anywhere from, I don't want to exaggerate. So it was probably 12 to 16 months. I can't remember exactly the time, but it took 16 months for me to submit my initial paperwork, sort of my intentions online, to meeting with recruiters, meeting with different regiments, sitting down, aptitude testing, and they build a file. So your file is your sort of recruitment application file of what trades you're applying for. I was applying for, I think it was infantry, artillery, armored. Like I wanted a combat arms trade. So you meet with various people and you write aptitudes, and they figure out where, and you have to actually score high enough on an aptitude test to get in specific trades. I think the highest aptitude requirement for a trade is armored officer. So this is the guy who's in a tank commanding a troop of tanks, which I don't know how many tanks that is, but it's a bunch, and all the crew of those tanks, and they're moving really quick. So you got to have I knew a few guys that were doing this in training, and they were very bright dudes. And this is the highest required aptitude scores to be a troop commander. So my original application, my first job was infantry. But when I had left London and I'd moved to Toronto, and the recruitment center for the reserve there is on Yonge Street, north end of Toronto, after a year plus of my application already being in, I showed up to meetings with the recruitment staff where they had told me that they didn't know who I was. They knew I had an appointment, but they couldn't find my recruitment file. And this happened twice. So twice they had completely lost my physical file and had no idea sort of where to start, and kind of sent me back home, even though I'd taken a half day off work to go and accommodate this meeting with these recruiters to keep the process moving, because it had been over a year at this point now, well over a year. And then multiple times I was told that my file had like completely physically disappeared by multiple people. So it was a little disheartening, but it kind of speaks to just going back to the numbers that you said there. So if they're able to sort of haphazardly with this horrific lack of organization bring in 5,000 people a year, if they want to 8x scale that to 40,000 a year, I can only imagine that there's going to be 25,000 files you know what I mean? Like I hope most of this now is gone digital and it's all sort of streamlined online and these things don't just evaporate into the ether like mine did. But it's absolutely delusional to believe that the people that work there now with the same skills, the same, you know what I mean, intentions, the same motivations are going to be able to 8 times leverage their current abilities to bring in skilled people that are meeting the aptitudes that are required, very bright people for certain positions, especially officer positions. I don't think that has any bearing on reality. And if I can speak to, and again, this is not an indictment of people that work in recruiting. I'm sure there are lots of bright people there. I've met a few of them. I was lucky enough to actually have met a few of them, and I work with them later on training. But typically, if I can speak in generalizations, the people that end up at recruiting are kind of the rejects from the battalions, from the regiments that are maybe injured or lazy or some combination of those things. And because they're not really valued in their home regiment or battalion, they're sent to recruiting. So you're already dealing with a pool of people that is less motivated, you know what I mean, less ambitious. They just want to show up and go through the motions. They don't care who gets hired or not. I know several people that have ended up in these roles. And I just, like, again, delusional to believe that these same folks are going to come in and 8x with the same tools, but maybe 20% more pay. We saw how well people worked during COVID in the lockdowns when everybody worked from home. Like they were real motivated. You know what I mean? So this is just more of the same nonsense. I hope it works. You know what I mean? Let's cross our fingers and hopefully this comes true. But my expectations are pretty low given my personal experience.
Yeah, no, and you know, it's almost like you wrote this report, because here, you know, I just want to break this down, and you know, to your earlier point, they didn't fix the systems. So in the 2025 Auditor General report, the systems are still archaic, manual, and basically she goes on to actually detail, talking about the fact that when these 190,000, so if she breaks it down, she actually has a chart in the report that we'll throw on the screen. And she basically says in 2024-25, they had 77,000 applications. Then the year before, 2023-24, they had 70,000, and 22-23, they had 43,000. Total applications in the 3 years, 191,000. So they've closed 103,000 applications without any explanation. So no one wrote anything. No one wrote on any of the documents and said why they closed. They literally just stale dated and closed them.
So these weren't people that had traded out of the system for aptitude or other reasons. They just went into the ether and vaporized.
Yeah, they were. So they only had 8% or 15,000 that were closed by recruiters for reasons or not meeting the criteria. So out of that 190,000, only 15,000 don't meet the criteria. 103,000 of them, they just disappear. They stale date them out. They drag them along, which looks to me like they're not really trying to get them aboard at that point. And then 73,000 are viable. Out of the 73,000, this is 3 years, right? This is over a 3-year period. Out of the viable ones that still stick around, 58,000 are still in progress when she does the report. So they haven't even been brought up. So you think about it, it's a 3-year period. You've whittled it down from 190 to 73,000. 58,000 of them still are in progress, and they bring aboard 15,000. So it's not, the funny thing is, this was kind of weird, because when I went into this, you know, and I started reading and I was getting ready for our show, I thought to myself, well, I don't meet a lot of people that join the military, so maybe people don't want to join the military. I having, lived in Canada, born in Canada, lived in the States, I always liked the military, quite frankly. I tried to convince my middle son to join the military. So, you know, I thought I do think it is a great profession, and I always thought of it very highly. But I thought, okay, maybe people, as time went on, they just phased out. But it didn't phase out. There are people who are interested in joining the military, like organically, who just never get a chance or never get seen. So
This is exactly what happened to me. I was so keen on joining the infantry, and I had friends that had convinced me to go to specific regiments that had different opportunities to become airborne, and I met so many amazing people there when I finally ended up getting there. Um, but it's exactly what I just said. It's these people that just sort of lack motivation, they lack administrative savvy. They're there to push papers around, and there's no accountability. And again, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because you don't want people just smashing people through the system either to meet some kind of arbitrary quota, so that you get people that are not as qualified, or wouldn't, you know what I mean? They're much less likely to be successful on training, because some of the training is really hard in the combat arms. It is no joke. And Canada produces some of the best, I'm very biased here, but if not the best, combat arms infantry soldiers in the world. And you got to make sure that you pick the right person for that role. But at the same time, I was very close after the second visit to recruiting, where they said, yeah, like, sorry, pal, we don't know what's going on and where your file went. And like, we're real, but I was so keen, and I was such a geek about it, and I really wanted to get there, that I was gonna, no matter how many times they closed the door, I was gonna keep pushing it open. So none of this surprises me at all. All the same systemic flaws exist, and they're going to use a giant funnel to try to push through. Forgive me for saying this. You know what I mean? 10 pounds of crap through a 5-pound bag. It doesn't, or in this sense, it would be 40 pounds of crap through a 5-pound bag. It doesn't add up. It's delusional. It makes no sense. It's a perfect example of how disconnected the leadership is from the reality on the ground of the actual people who work there. And yeah, my story is a shining example of what's going on.
do you think, and Brian, the more I read this, and I was reading again this morning, and there's, in the Auditor General's report, there's quite a few examples of, she takes samples of 51 people and she follows them for a while. And it's the same as your story, right? Like they get lost. They go multiple times for meetings. So she followed up, and finally they're not as resilient as you. They just fall off. But do you think it was a funding issue? So, when I was reading it, I'm thinking, okay, 2022 to 25, you heard all the horror stories about, funding for the military diminishing, not having enough funding lacking. You think they were just kind of slow walking it because if the more people they brought aboard, the more issues they had, right? So they had to pay them, they had to house them, they had to, they had to get ammunitions and weapons, they had to do all these things, and they just didn't have. So they kind of just slow walked it until the government finally came, and now they've made a commitment in this budget to do it. So, hopefully that'll make a difference. I don't know. It seems kind of, and this is from a layman's and outside point of view, from, Joe Public, which I am, is quite frank. It seems almost impossible that a military, which should probably run on discipline and logistics, right, has a challenge with some of the things we're talking about today. Like when we talk about recruitment, housing, like how can they not be good at the logistics of it? Just, it boggles my mind, unless there's a motivation somewhere. And
That's so if I'm trying to understand your question, like, is it a strictly a funding issue versus a personnel aptitude issue?
yeah, well, I'm thinking maybe they slow walked it, or they just lost the applications, because quite frankly, they weren't going to want to hit their quota. So the 19,000 quota, they were probably just thinking, we will hit 5,000 and we'll just do that to appease everyone. We'll use some of the funding. It looks like it was motivated, because quite frankly, I have a hard time believing in these numbers that 190,000 people showed up, put an application. And as you alluded to earlier, people who join the military, want to join the military, give it a lot of thought. Like I lived, like I said, in 2 countries primarily, but everyone I knew who joined the military always has a great story about why. They have a rationale. So these are people who came with an intent, and then were discouraged by, like you said, like people who are either unmotivated or probably some goals or some goal setting on their part, or not to meet the objective, so they decided they weren't going to do it. They created an agenda, and therefore they didn't reach their goals. So they didn't get to the 19,000. They ended up at 15 or 5,000 a year. It just seems like, when I read between the lines, it seems like funding or motivation wasn't there.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think that it's going to be divided across a few categories here. I think motivation or discipline slash skill sets of the people in recruiting is probably 80% of the problem. Nothing is completely true all the time, sort of thing. So I would say 80 plus percent of that is you're putting weak people in positions that are actually quite important in terms of you're the front face of the military. You don't want the reject who, you know what I mean, is constantly can't keep up with the rest of the platoon, going to then face the applicants who are coming in being like, yikes, you know what I mean? I don't, if this is who the military is, maybe this isn't what I thought it was, kind of thing. So that's one of the problems right there. And then all the correlating issues that are happening along with this person's lack of motivation or discipline. And then you have the marketing campaign of the military for the last few years that has been nothing short of an embarrassment. You have rainbow flag this, you know what I mean, purple hair this, you can come here and be whoever you know what I mean. And again, this has nothing to do with being black, white, gay, straight. No, nobody cares about that in the military. I've never met someone who does. There's apparently the military, especially the combat arms, is full of toxic bigot males, you know what I mean, who are ready to take down anyone who's not a cis white male, or insert woke, you know what I mean, word there. But it's not like that at all. I'm sure there's problem people, and they get their names come up and they get kicked out, or they go to jail, they did something stupid, and then you lose them. But when you have a marketing campaign that surrounds, we need to get this minority represented, we need to get more women doing this, it's like, how about we just blanket look for people that want to be here, and then make sure that the roles they're trying to fill fit their skill sets and aptitudes, and we just do that, instead of targeting specific people that historically have less interest or success rate in accomplishing these really difficult training. And I think these things kind of bleed into one another. And when you're losing all these files and you're having good people that are, and the cost of living in Toronto at the time for me was insane. Like I had to work I had a full-time job at a sales role in a company. I had to bartend and bounce on the weekends, and then I also had to do my reservist stuff when I finally got through. So you've got people that are trying to get a job that are being literally just attrited out of laziness, who need money, they need work. So when you've gone through this for months and months on end, these problems just compound, and then maybe they see the commercial of the purple haired, you know what I mean, whatever, that's obese and on the front lines. And there's a funny story. A friend of mine actually was working in recruiting and this guy is in the special forces now, and he's about as dialed in as it gets. Like he's not one of the examples of the negative people that I've given you. And he was telling me that across his desk, or one of his colleagues' desk, came the application of a small person, a midget or a dwarf. Forgive me if these aren't PC terms. I don't know what the new lingo is to call it. But anyway, so this person, and God bless his or her soul, I can't remember, that it doesn't matter, that they want to be involved in, man, let's find something for this guy or gal to do. But he was recruited into the infantry, where you have to carry a firearm that is as tall as this person. And you have to carry a backpack that can weigh in excess of 50, 60, 70 pounds at times. And that's just not a thing for someone that maybe weighs 50, 60, 80 pounds or whatever. Like that's not realistic. And this person is going to end up being a liability. That doesn't mean there isn't something they can do, that they can absolutely be a valuable supporter behind the scenes. But like this woke stuff has to go. and it's absolutely part of the problem. And I think these things are all bleeding together. And we just need to get more savvy people in these roles who are a better face of the organization, who, when someone walks in, they see a checked out woman, you know what I mean, man who's got his time in and is actually wants to share and bring people in. And I think that would make a difference too.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so this budget, I'm just gonna go back for a minute. This budget, which actually calls for a 38% increase in unemployment in the next 5 years. So over the next 5 years, the budget actually increases the unemployment expenditures in the country by 38%. So they're expecting a higher unemployment rate. Unemployment rate from today, which is already 7%. So it should be, if you think about it really technically, it should be very easy to find good people to come aboard and have the strongest military you've ever had, quite frankly, because we're almost at, if you increase our unemployment rate from 38% increase. So you're upwards somewhere towards 10%, which is really depression rates, right? Like that's a high unemployment. If you in the country, we have about 30 million people who are actively able to work. So that would be 3 million people in the country would be unemployed. And that's what they're projecting in their budget that they've just got through confidence vote. So you should be able to convert a bunch of those people who are skilled, which that's where I want to jump to next. You should be able to actively bring skilled people in and put them into really great jobs, and for them to excel, heading towards a career in the military, which a career in the military, at the end, you end up with a pension and benefits. That's something we should actually look at actually adding some more money to, making it more attractive again. So you do your time in the military, you do your 10 years, then you come out, you get your defined benefit plan, you get your benefits. All those things are things that we should be promoting highly, right? The salary increase, the benefit plan. And quite frankly, if you're out of work, look at it as an option. I
agree.
Yeah, because in this report, she actually goes through, and the Auditor General, and she says, well, they're having a tough time. The armed forces are having a tough time recruiting skilled people. I'm like, okay, well, are you actively recruiting skilled people? Are you creating, and so I was a little shocked, because if you're having so many applications denied, if you're doing all this, how can you say you're actively recruiting skilled people? Are you going to trade schools? Are you talking to people? Because I know right now, and Brian, where you're living, where I'm living right now, quite frankly, all the guys I know who are on skilled trades are calling me every day. So my phone rings off the hook every day with 5 or 6 calls from guys in the trades, because I did some home building. I've been in industrial construction. Quite frankly, they're asking me, do you have work? Do I need to travel? Do I need to be going anywhere? And I feel like saying to them, have you looked at the military? Have you considered going into military for like even a 5-year stint? And
there are carpenters in the military. There's electricians in the military. There's plumbers in the military. You can be an HVAC guy in the military, and it comes with all the benefits of the government, like you said, incentives and sort of long-term strategies, pensions, and healthcare. Like all those things can be done in the military if someone's interested in doing that.
Yeah. Well, and so this is interesting. So I'm going to jump ahead a minute, then I'll come back. But the thing that I found, which was then the next Auditor General's report. So she actually comes out and she says, we didn't plan for housing. And I'm like, what do you mean you didn't plan for housing? So they say, the military didn't do a good job at figuring out their housing requirement. So then you look at it, and if you do the numbers, the number of 65,000 people, they only have housing, whether it be barracks or multiple housing for people, of roughly 27% of that 65,000 people actually live in one of those units. The rest live off base, and so they're short. I think they're short almost 3,500 dwellings right now. So this is, apartments, homes, whatever it is, they're short. And they're short a bunch of beds for if they increase the reserve. Well, we didn't even talk about that. They're talking about increasing the reserve by bringing in the public service. So, we're going to go to 40,000. Then they're talking about bringing another 300,000 reserves from the public service, which I don't know. Or what does a reserve make? A couple $100 a day?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so they're going to come and they're going to do their 10 days a year, or whatever they do, which is a little bizarre. I don't know. Your thoughts on that? Like, I don't know what you do in 10 days, and the fact that you're making public service people do it, right?
I'm not even sure where to begin here with the intentions from the all seeing, all knowing CDS here. But that is another capital D delusional way of thinking. I joined in the reserve, so I went through the reserve experience, and then I moved over to the Reg Force. And like I said, I was so I had to be there 3 days, so a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, twice a month to go through basic training, which was I think 12 weeks or so, something like that. So twice a month, I had to give them 6 days total of a month for many weeks, and then you can sort of accomplish, if you're a relatively smart person, you can figure out basic training in that amount of time. It's not that complicated to figure out how to make your bed, and then, you know what I mean, do some navigation and how to clean your rifle and handle a rifle safely. But to think that we can bring in that many people, I think her quote was 7 days. We want to get them battle ready times 300,000. I don't know where this training is going to be conducted. I don't know where the logistics of, like you said, feeding and housing and training and equipping all these people is going to be there. I think you mentioned procurement, and we can probably move into that shortly. But when I was in procurement, worked for the military police branch at headquarters there in Ottawa, there was so few firearms. I was procuring new firearms. I was on the team of people that was procuring new firearms, getting all the admin drawn up and getting all the signatures and money allocated, $5 million, I believe it was, or something like that. The military police were finishing a shift and then handing their pistol off to the next police officer that was in the rotation. You know what I mean? Because now that their patrol had started, that there wasn't enough pistols to go around the detachments. So now we're going to bring in 300,000 people to use what equipment? The ones that we're sharing amongst each other and cannibalizing amongst each other so that we can have parts for it. None of this makes sense. And the CDS is absolutely just out to lunch with everything, almost everything she says. And I saw a quote of her being questioned about the quotas or whatever that were in place to get women and minorities or whoever, and she said, well, it's not a quota, but we're trying to target these people. And it's like, look, we need to just bring in people who want to be here, who are going to stick around. It doesn't matter where they come from. It doesn't matter what color their hair or eyes is. Like, stop with this. It needs to go. And that 300,000 number is laughable on a good day. Like, maybe 1% of that would be realistic, to bring in that many people in a given amount of time to get them actually trained, battle ready, that if something was to go sideways, we're going to put them out there and they're going to be a contributing part of this machine to react to emergencies or threats or something like that. Because it's, having been through very intense training through several different portions of my career, it's very easy to kill the guy beside you or yourself, or, you know what I mean, just or slow people down to the point of where now that you're such a liability that things are going to go sideways. They're like, insert reason why that doesn't make sense. And the fact that they even bring this up in meetings is honestly terrifying. I can't believe how delusional this lady is.
Yeah. No. Well, the results are, just that proves it, right? What we're seeing. So, 11,700 residential housing units on the bases and wings across the country. And then we have 26,000 bed spaces available, like the dormitory type beds. That's the inventory of the military. So, like, some of these plans are like, we're so far away from completing a lot of these plans, whether it be recruitment or reserves or whatever, because we don't even have right now the infrastructure. And the sad part is, right now, I just alluded back to trades and skilled workers and everything else. And it frustrates me because the coordination of all these tactics and goals are so disjointed, where in my mind, you're projecting to have a high unemployment rate. Okay, great. You can recruit people to come in that are skilled from there. you don't have enough housing. You don't have enough, the housing you do have, quite frankly. I stopped reading the housing AG report because it made me so mad. I was just so pissed off that these people were living in the, number one, most of them didn't get anywhere to live. And when they did get a place to live, it was terrifying. They're 1930s homes that are falling down. Most of them are unfinished. I couldn't believe that they were putting people in unfinished dwellings. I'm like, why
Moldy,
would, why would,
Like I would use the word squalor for some of the things that I've seen in places that lived. I lived in Gagetown for the better part of a year during my infantry training, and it was a regular routine for me to take mouse feces out of the inside of my bed, like inside my sheets. The mice would be living because it was warm. I would get up and you'd have to make your bed, and then you go off and you do your thing.
oh,
You
wow.
do your training all day, and you come back, and there's mouse feces in my bed almost daily.
Wow. Yeah. No. And when I started getting there with, the water, the water wasn't good. The housing wasn't good. I'm thinking to myself, my goodness. So what would motivate me? Because that came to the next thing that she did report on, which I thought was very good. They have as many people. So, we're bringing in these 5,000 people, and we have as many people quitting as we're recruiting. So the net, the interesting, and I didn't even bring it up earlier and I forgot it, but then in the report, she says basically that they did recruit 15,000 people and they had 15,000 people leave. So the net zero,
Sorry, I'm
right?
laughing. It's so crazy.
Yeah. So the net zero. So your goal of increasing and what it was is they couldn't get, they were the reasons that they did note down, they couldn't get the training they want, they couldn't get the skilled training they want, and they didn't see the direction. So they could, it wasn't going anywhere. They couldn't see it. So they lasted 4 years, and quite frankly, they had almost an impossible time of keeping skilled people. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm trying to think. So you need to build housing, you need to build infrastructure. You have 65,000 people, you're recruiting 15,000 people. Would you not link the two together? And there's a picture on a report of actually it's a guy on a roof with another guy all dressed in military fatigues. And I'm thinking to myself, would that not be your force? Like, would that not be the skill set that you would be growing? So those ladies and gentlemen in the armed forces would learn how to build homes, how to do all the trades that they need to do that. And quite frankly, when they do leave, if they wanted to open their own companies, become builders, become developers, they would learn that business, right? And I think, where's the disconnect here? Like, why would someone who goes into the military making a decent salary with a benefit plan, who has to really stay for 10 years, not even make it to 4 years? And I think that's what they need to address. They need to go back and look at it and say, I'm not staying because I can't see the direction. I can't understand my training. I can't understand how I'm getting any skills. Like,
I can speak to that a little bit, at least my interpretation of that, and talking to guys over the 11 plus years that I was there. Many of the bases that these huge that you'll house multiple battalion type thousands of people basically live on these bases. They're in places in Canada that nobody really wants to live anymore. You know what I mean? So now you have social media, which has completely changed the game of people's access to information and
mhm.
things they can learn and know and see how other people are living. And you're trying to send someone from Gen Z or you know what I mean, insert whatever the 18-year-old person is now, and you're going to try to convince them that they should go live in Shiloh, Manitoba. And this is nothing against people from Shiloh, Manitoba, or anyone in Manitoba
Yeah,
or Winnipeg or
I
anything
get it.
like that. But there is not a lot there for a young single man, or you could maybe argue for a young single woman. She'll be able to have her pick of the young single guys that are there, because it's probably 95-5 men and women in the Canadian military. Depending on where you are in the country, it might be a little bit different, but it's vastly filled by men. So you're going to try to convince these young people to go live in Petawawa, Shiloh, you know what I mean, Gagetown. And these are can be great places if you're a young family, you know what I mean? You want to raise your son, daughter, whatever, in these sort of cottage country areas, but be prepared for like 8 months of winter And when it's not frigid outside, it's mosquitoes galore. You know what I mean? So trying to convince someone that this is their path, 4 years, I'm surprised they lasted that long. Depending on their postings, maybe Cold Lake came up. It's not called Warm Lake. You know what I mean? This is like, these are places that are, they're austere and they're
Yeah.
kind of hard to live. And I think that's part of the problem. There used to be a combat arms regiment a combat arms battalion in BC. I think it was in Nanaimo, if I'm remembering correctly. So you could have joined the military as an infantry guy or gal and then moved out west and lived in the mountains on the ocean. I don't think it would be that hard to convince young people to do that. But when you try to convince them to move to centrally located, like almost in the Arctic Circle type place where, you know what I mean, they're not really able to have a social life outside of swatting mosquitoes a lot of the time, it's like there's not a huge incentive to go there. And again, this is not the entire problem at all. I'm not pretending like I know what's exactly going on, but I think this is part of it. And I don't even know where to begin to address building new bases in places that are more appetizing for people to come and live there. Like that undertaking would be unbelievable to find that much space and produce that much housing. But that's definitely, in my opinion, part of the problem that these young people are experiencing, and they don't want to live in these places. And I know personally multiple people that got posted somewhere that made no sense for them or their family, and they just ended up leaving the entire military because they did not want to live in that place.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. This report, it's almost like you're writing it, to tell you the truth. You know, the number one request for housing is from single people. So the majority, it's almost like 80% of the basically missing housing for these young people going there are basically for single people. It's for one person. So, you know, and it does appear that's why. But I really, you know, the disconnect that I find, and I found so crazy, was you need all these things to happen. And, you know, military has always been, you know, and you know more than that, is, you know, your primary job when you set down anywhere, whether it's an operation or whether it's just daily administration, is to actually, you know, make your circumstances, your place where you're living, the best it can be, and make yourself ready. Readiness is super important. So by training those skills and getting people to learn them, quite frankly, when you set up in somewhere, or you set up for an operation in another country or something else, you're going to have a bunch of people who know how to build things. So quite frankly, they're already builders. So what would hurt your own military from becoming its own building faction? And that's the one that kind of confused me a little bit. Like, you really should be able to, and I'm not saying that's your primary role, but that should be something that everyone in the military should be good at. And I recently,
are you talking specific sort of carpentry skills, hands, working with your hands and physically building things, literally?
well, even if it's just general labor, you know, a lot of building anything is just general labor, right? It's coordination, it's program, you know, and again, the logistics of actually building anything are very similar to military logistics, right? You know, you have to get those walls up, you got to get those doors in, those windows in, you got to get it heated, you got to get it ready, you got to get it, you know, furnished. Those are all the things you do to get a building ready for after permitting. But, you know, in this case, quite frankly, you know, we're looking at just a diminishing or infrastructure for housing in the military that's falling down around itself. And quite frankly, to me, it's like, why would we have the money, we have the people, because, you know, the billions of dollars we're putting into it. Why wouldn't we invest some money in our own infrastructure to make people happier to live there? So give them nicer places to live, have them take the pride and ownership of being involved in that, and also get the skill set to do it. So they also are involved, so they can say, you know, I helped build that barracks, I helped build that apartment building, I did whatever, the house, you know, I was part of that. And quite frankly, then, you know, they'll take that skill, and when they do leave the military, they'll have just another skill that they can put on their resume, that they can move towards if they want to. It just gives you, and I grew up in I guess it's a generational thing a little bit, Brian. You know, I grew up in a generation of people that quite frankly, we all learned to build, you know, my background being Italian. quite frankly. We were taught from like kids, like we were just taught to build. Like they were just like, okay, you have to learn to build a house. There wasn't an option, right? Because everyone was doing it and you were around it. And to me, it's very I just find it disjointed. I find like when I read this report, I gave up at the end, and I'm like, this is just for lack of trying. Like I think at some point, the housing issue that came to light in the AG report was just the people who weren't trying anymore. They weren't interested in bettering their circumstances and their living, and that was actually, I felt bad. It at the end of it, when I put it down, I was like, oh, this is terrible, right? Like how can they not see this as beneficial to growing the armed forces? And it is too bad.
The disjointed piece speaks to the disconnect from the senior leadership, from the actual folks on the ground. And part of that comes from,
100%,
in my
100%.
opinion, again, there's 145 odd generals in the Canadian military. 145 generals for, and I think actually there's a bit of a psyop from the public affairs people that that openly speak to the media about what's going on in the military. And I think to a certain degree, maybe some of this is necessary for national security reasons, whatever. But I think the actual military is somewhere between Army, Navy, Air Force, CANSOFCOM. I think that it's probably somewhere between 40 and 50,000 strong. That includes Reg Force and Reserve. So the amount of generals we have for the amount of people we have is utterly ridiculous. You have all these folks at the very top, you know what I mean, getting the best postings to exotic places around the world while they do quite literally next to nothing, short of being the face of a Canadian in, you know what I mean, some exotic locale where everything's covered and their tax-free money is coming in from the colonels and above. Meanwhile, you know what I mean, the corporals and the privates or whoever is living in squalor in a mold-filled building. And it's like, well, how come we can't retain these people longer than 4 years? Well, gee, I wonder why. Maybe the $250,000 salary tax-free for, you know what I mean, the gentleman that's like living in Maui or whatever. Like, I'm pretty sure there are literally Hawaiian postings for people, and good for you, you earned it. But like, we need to trim the top down and start, you know what I mean, looking for the skilled people that you're talking about, how to incorporate that into actually literal builders, like maybe a campaign targeting skilled labor that maybe this isn't the right verbiage, but results in a red seal or something, you know what I mean? Like when you leave you put in your 2-3 or however long it takes to do that, like now you can go off and have a business because you did your 3 years of carpentry, electrician, plumbing, or whatever. You know what I mean? And now go off and do your own thing if that's what you want, or stick around and keep building, depending on the incentives or where you're at in life. But maybe they need to increase the campaign for those folks by about 100x, you know what I mean, to try to bring in that to meet the need. But it's from the top down, it's broken. And it's exactly what you just said. And maybe a campaign targeting these skilled people that you talk about would make a difference.
Yeah, no, I think it's alignment, right? Like I honestly think it's so far out of alignment, and I and thank you for that, because I don't know the composition, but just reading the reports, it's like, how could it be this far out of, like, it's just unbelievable. And you take the full budget and you look at the amount of money they're going to allocate, and we haven't even talked about procurement yet, and I think probably we'll end up doing it on the next show. But you wonder how it got so far out of alignment. Like, how did you not figure out, number one, you didn't have enough housing? So even if you would have hit your targets, even if you would have hit, when you did it, even if you would have hit half of your targets for those 3 years, you still didn't have enough housing.
Can I jump in with that, with yet another example of something that I witnessed when I was a military police officer? So I was working in force development, which is a fancy way of saying sort of procurement and planning for future procurement and skills and the equipment that goes along with these abilities, and abilities have to be maintained and augmented to continue on. So there was one meeting in particular that I was the secretary for, of all the senior leadership from military police across the country. And I'm sitting in this meeting, and I'm working from home at the time. And I'm taking notes on the meeting about what they're forecasting and planning for the military police branch for the next 5 to 10 years. So keep in mind what I said before about there's not enough pistols to go around, and they're cannibalizing them to find parts for other pistols so that they can maintain at least the basic operational readiness. And in this, sorry, I can't not laugh at this because it's so, I'm going to say delusional 50 times in this podcast, because that's exactly what this meeting was. I couldn't believe what I was hearing from the colonels, the majors, the people planning the next 5 to 10 years for the military police while their pistols are falling apart. They were talking about bringing in drones to put in the back of military police cruisers. So let's say you have an IARD situation. So this is like someone's immediate action response drills or something it stands for. So let's say you have someone barricaded in a building. Maybe they're an active shooter, maybe there's a hostage or whatever. Like something's going on somewhere where you need a perimeter security, a cordon. It would help to have eyes on from all angles. So they're talking about putting drones in the trunks of police cruisers so that the military police officer can show up to the scene, pop open his trunk, and start flying a drone above the scene to have a bird's eye view of perimeter, you know what I mean, eyes on, as a capability moving into the future. Meanwhile, they can't retain people, they can't fix housing, they don't have enough pistols to go around. You know what I mean? The food is poisonous. The water in the building I was working at was condemned because they thought it had Legionnaire's disease. Like I could bore you forever with the list that goes on. And I'm sitting in this meeting trying to take notes while my microphone's muted because I'm the same as I'm doing now. I'm laughing at this. It's so utterly ridiculous. And then someone with a lot more experience in staff than me will come in and say, yeah, but we need to, you know what I mean, plan for we need to allocate where we're going to be. And it's just like, okay, sure, maybe. But maybe you should also think about taking care of and solving the problems that are immediately on fire in front of you. It's that dog in the room cartoon meme where the room is on fire and he's drinking coffee and this is fine. You know, this is fine. That's what that place was. And I couldn't get out of there fast enough. Honestly, when I was in that role, it was just cringy.
Yeah. No. And, when you describe it, that's what was, that's how I felt reading all of this in the last few days. It's like the building blocks are missing. It really is. It's like the foundation of this house is not built properly. And quite frankly, you have to kind of knock it down and start again and redig and then start.
Yeah, but instead of fixing the foundation, you're going to put in an advanced new, you know what I mean, skylight system with radar and 5G. You know what I mean? Yeah. Instead of like patching the leaks that the water is flooding into. That's how they treat this. It's wild.
Well, and that's exactly, what, because when you do read the budget and you do read all the sophisticated software and hardware that they're actually planning, whether it be in the Arctic or wherever it is, you think to yourself, oh, wow, this is cool, right? And then you start reading the AG reports and you're like, wow, this isn't so cool anymore. So, there's a disjoint definitely between the two stories for sure. Brian, I'm going to end it there. What I want to do is next time, I really want to get into procurement because quite frankly, there's been so many stories, whether it be airplanes, submarines, all the stuff going on. So next show, let's get together and dig into that. I really look forward to it. I enjoyed spending time today, and thanks for the stories because that gives me perspective. Because when I was reading this, by the end of it, I just threw it down. I thought, oh my goodness. And you could walk away, but we shouldn't walk away. The real thing is, it's not for us to walk away, right? We got to try to fix this because if we're going to spend all this money, spend this time, and have a great military, we got to rebuild that foundation. So thanks very much.
Exactly. You from an outsider perspective, I think you have your finger on the pulse pretty well. So thanks for having me. And I'm happy to come back and share more about the other stuff that I saw. Just prepare to cringe a little bit more every time I come back.
I will. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Stay tuned, guys. Subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you soon when we talk more on the pillar of defense.